Hello, my name is Kobe Thurman and welcome to our show. Today's topic, we are going to talk about the main topic in the world today, in our nation, gun violence in the schools. Today I have Mr. Kamotek with me, student here at, teacher here at Bishop Timon, excuse me. I'd like to thank you for coming to talk about the gun issues.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
So you heard everything so far about the recent developments in gun violence and everything, you know, gun laws, they're trying to get strict. The schools, they're sick and tired of it. Like, what is your, whole idea of this situation?
Well, obviously it's not good, things that are happening. Right now, I mean, there are rules, as far as I understand, that there are laws in place that do supposedly prevent people from bringing guns onto school properties. Unfortunately, the perpetrators of these horrific things don't seem to be following the law, so that's a problem.
Yeah. And the big question for a lot of people is the fact that, you know, it's kids that are doing this, kids that are committing these acts, and the real question is why did they choose to do it? So, in your best opinion, how do you believe we can filter out, you know, these kids that have problems and from the regular kids?
I think that just being observant, especially as an adult in the building, or any adult, whether it's a teacher, any staff member, anyone right on down the line, just being aware and seeing things. I think a big contributor to a lot of this is bullying. And I think the more we get a handle on that, these kids, they're fighting back because they can't do it maybe with words or other ways, that they're resorting to these extreme measures. And I think as adults in the building, if we pay attention and be observant about, you know, noticing things like that happening, we might be able to prevent things before it gets out of hand.
Yeah. And, you know, that's we don't know. Really, it's not like a knowing thing. You know, kids, they have problems at home, they got problems at school, and, you know, all that can lead to, dangerous things. And it's so sad to see how it affects a whole lot of people, not just the individuals, but a lot of people. What is your opinion on if teachers would be armed with guns in school?
It's a tough question because now you're splitting the job of a teacher, I guess. To me, carrying, you know, a firearm and for protective purposes is a very serious thing, and there's a great responsibility that goes along with that. And I don't know. I'm not saying it's the right answer. I'm not saying it's the wrong answer, but it's certainly something that should give us something to think about. In that, you know, my day-to-day, I spend worrying about educating young people and making them successful in things. Carrying a firearm, like I said, even to, you know, protect, that's a whole nother set of responsibilities that are always going to have to be in your mind. I don't know if that could be something that would distract the teacher from doing their primary job. So again, I don't know if it's a good thing or not a good thing. It's a tough thing.
Yeah, and then we saw in recent weeks, we saw this was a preview of what could happen if teachers were armed. There was a teacher, he had a gun in the classroom, accidentally went off, and it injured a child. You know, it could have been worse, but this will give people an image of what could happen if teachers were armed. So, you know, hopefully that'll open some eyes, and, you know, people will realize that this is what can happen.
Good. It also comes down to training as well. Obviously, we are not police officers, and everything I've read suggests that they would very intense training. Once again, if you start getting into intensive training, does it take away from classroom time? Things like that. Are you sacrificing the quality of education? And not to mention, law enforcement officers are routinely put in high stress environments, high stress situations where they can make these decisions. Teachers are not. So you could run into a situation where you're thrown into a very high stress, a deadly situation. Can a teacher be trained enough in short enough amount of time to make the right decisions?
And another question is, how do you feel about the walkout? Do you think, because every school in the nation has done it, do you think, it was a good thing or bad thing or useless?
I don't know that it was effective, in my opinion. It certainly didn't raise any awareness, because if you weren't aware of what was going on and the things that have been going on, then you've been living under a rock. So I don't think it raised any awareness. I think for some people it was paying the respects to those people that lost their lives, certainly. Whether it's going to have any impact on anything, that I don't know. It's a good question.
What do you think is the best way for us to raise awareness to this? So people are aware of what is going on and we can stop this.
Well, I think going back to, I think people are aware. I think there's aren't too many people that don't know what's going on. I think they do. I think it's a matter of what are we going to do about it. The problem is the people. Guns have always been around. Why is it that in the past 20 years, 30 years, all of a sudden these things are happening? We've all heard stories of grandfathers and uncles. They used to, their hunting rifle being in the back of the truck at school and things, and there were never any problems. My biggest gripe, I guess, is the glorification of violence in music, movies, television. It's there. No one wants to admit that because that's their cash cow. It sells. But young people are easily affected by things. And when you glorify it through music and in the media culture, they become desensitized and that becomes part of the problem.
Yeah. And then one major topic is the people who are in charge of the schools, the principals, what they go through when things happen, the thoughts of what they could have done to stop this issue or what they could have done to prevent it. My question to you is, if you were in charge, how would you go about it, school safety-wise, if you were principal?
In a practical day-to-day situation, I don't know. I don't think that necessarily metal detectors and things like that are foolproof. Certainly there's people that, as soon as you devise a way to prevent people from bringing something in, people are going to find a way around it. I mean, they still do it on airlines and things in airports. There are metal detectors and all that. I think it's people, as I said, being aware as adults in the building and seeing warning signs and seeing things. I mean, several of these school shootings, after the fact, these social media accounts are loaded with all sorts of very disturbing things, or some of these even have had run-ins with the police, domestic issues. Those are red flags that someone or people dropped the ball. We can't be doing that. I think we have to be more observant people.
Yeah. And the major question that a lot of people have been asking teachers is, if somebody asked you to carry a gun in school, would you do it?
There'd be a lot of questions I would have ahead of time. First and foremost being confidentiality. Who's going to know?
Yeah.
Because one of the problems you're going to run into then is you become a target. Someone decides they want to carry out something. If they know who the teacher or teachers and the adults in the building who are armed, they're going to take you out first. And then they can have free reign because you are the protective element there. So confidentiality would be certainly an issue. Again, I don't know that I could give a straight answer because I think it would be almost, I don't want to say a conflict of interest, but a dividing of concentration and efforts and things that education might suffer. To me, it's a protective thing that there's people, that's their job, is to protect, and they do it very well when called upon. I don't know that if we could, the teachers could split their time effectively.
Yeah, that's a major thing too, you know, with the training and everything. They have to be really trained, you know, because anything can happen. You know, you got to look at the pros and cons of this. People automatically looked at the pros when they said teachers getting armed. You know, it may stop the school shooting, you know, easily, but you got to look at the con point that a teacher brought up. Is like you can have the weapon, and school shooting can happen. Who's to say that you shoot the wrong person? You know, you got to look at the big con of that.
Right. Well, that's, as I had mentioned before, about being put in high stress situations, making the right decision to pull the trigger, not. You know, teachers, I mean, there's only so much training you're gonna, that's not our vocation. That's not what we do. You know, and then would a teacher want to have that? That's an enormous responsibility to have. It would take, it's not for everyone. It certainly wouldn't be for everyone.
Yeah. My question to you, another question is, the Columbine situation. Did you think that after that, more school shootings would happen?
I mean, that's going back a ways now, but I remember when it did happen, that was certainly the first that was broadcast nationally and really brought awareness, or not awareness, but it was the first major incident. To be honest, at the time I thought it was a one-time thing. That, you know, because my first always thought is, who does that?
Yeah.
Who would do that to other people? Yeah. And unfortunately, it was not a one-time thing. But no, I didn't think it was going to set a precedence. Obviously, there's young people, as I said, are very impressionable, and they see people their own age doing these things, and some folks who feel they have nothing left in life, or they need to make a statement, they need to go out in a blaze of glory. You know, they see that as inspiration, unfortunately, yeah, instead of a deterrent.
Yeah. It's a real troubling time right now because, you know, you don't know what could happen. Well, I would like to thank you, Mr. Kamotek, for coming out and
my pleasure.
Answering our questions for us. We're wrapping up this segment. I want to thank Mr. Kamotek again for coming out, and we're going to move on to our next guest.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Colin Tong, and right now I'm going to bring you a sad story that took place today at Great Mills High School in St. Mary's County, about 70 miles south of Washington, D.C. A student was shot and critically wounded at Maryland High School before a campus security officer ended the attack by the shooter. Unfortunately, the shooter's life was taken by the officer, so we can get no more further questions from him, but we can look into the attack. The shooter shot a male student and a female student at Great Mills High School in St. Mary's County and was then wounded by a campus security officer, County Sheriff Timothy Cameron told MSNBC. The two victims are in critical condition at the hospital. The security officer involved in the shooting was apparently not injured in the exchange. Our school resource officer, who was stationed inside the school, was alerted to the event and the shots being fired, Cameron said. He pursued the shooter, engaged the shooter. During that engagement, he fired a round at the shooter. Simultaneously, the shooter fired a round as well. The officer was not harmed, the sheriff said. And now I'd like to welcome our guest for this segment, Miss Linda Simmons, principal here at Bishop Timon High School. Miss Simmons, after hearing this news, what are your direct reactions to this?
Obviously, whenever this type of shooting takes place, whether it's in a school or anywhere else, to be honest, and it's just senseless violence, it saddens everyone. It particularly saddens me, having spent the last 40-some years in schools, to think that we're at the point where these things happen with such too great a frequency.
Yeah.
It's just horrible.
So in all your experience that you mentioned, has the question about gun violence ever come up in such effect that it is today?
Yes, it always comes up because, gun violence in schools is not really a new thing. I think we hear more about it now, and in this year in particular, it's been more frequent than it's been in the past. But gun violence has occurred in schools for over many decades. So yes, I've been involved in many conversations. That's really where, all all the school safety plans and the drills that the state requires and that we do, and always looking at ways to try to protect students first and everyone else in the school. All those conversations are ongoing really in all the meetings, circles, really everywhere.
So you mentioned putting students first. One way to protect them, a lot of people are saying give teachers guns. In your opinion, do you think that giving teachers guns is the right solution? Or how do you feel on that idea?
My personal opinion is that there are many issues and problems related to that need to be worked through before that would be considered. I'm very much in support of school resource officers being armed and in schools. I am not in support of people who are perhaps not comfortable even having a gun, whether they would have to carry it or just have it locked in a classroom. Number two, just having one doesn't mean that someone is good at or able to use it. I can see, having professional development days, where teachers have to go and learn to shoot and practice. It's not as if you have a gun and you know how to use it. And in a school where there's hundreds or thousands sometimes of students, someone who's not, who may have a gun but is not prepared to use it or use it expertly could shoot other people, and not even trying to do the right thing, but harm others. So I think at this point it's really not well thought out, and I think it's not a good idea. Let's take the example of just what happened a few weeks ago in a school. I think it was San Diego, but I could be wrong, where the person teaching gun safety,
Yeah, I saw this news story as well.
a person who was an expert, a deputy, was teaching gun safety, should not have had the gun in school, but nevertheless had it, and it went off 3 times, thankfully, into the ceiling, but still students were injured. So I just don't trust the notion of, in a situation with hundreds or thousands of students and other adults, that it's a good situation.
Yeah. So just last week, our school, Timon, we took part in the national walkout. Do you think that went well, or do you think that more could have been done to raise more awareness, I guess you could say?
Well, I think it went well in the sense that it was student initiated. It was, I didn't learn about it till an hour before, and we as a faculty had talked about it as soon as we knew the date, but it was supposed to be student initiated, so we decided to wait to see if our students were going to initiate something, and something did get initiated, but it was at, kind of at the last minute. More can always be done. I think that what we have to be careful about, though, is that people fall on all sides of the issue. So in schools, generally, what we want to do is make sure people are well educated and informed, but not tell them how to think about something or what because people will feel differently about different issues.
Mm-hmm. So have any teachers, parents, people in the community, or even students asked you, as the principal of this school, what precautions we're taking right now, or with the recent events like what we saw in Maryland today and in Parkland, Florida?
Not since those events. We have a safety committee in the school, and we do, as you know, we do drills.
Mm-hmm.
We're prepared to a point. I'm not sure you're ever prepared when a person, because there's so many loopholes in terms of how shooters get into a school or are in a school, how it happens. I'm not sure you can ever be 100% prepared, but we do, like I said, we have a safety plan. People are informed about it. We're always trying to improve on it. Just recently, there was a sequence on Channel 2 in the morning news. I don't know if any of you saw it, but it was an engineering class in a school, not local, but a school in another state, where they actually designed like a door jamb, but it's one that's really it's, once you screw it in, it takes like 10 seconds to put it in, screw it in, and I think that we're looking at perhaps acquiring those for every classroom, because that's one of the primary ways in which shooters enter classrooms, by shooting out locks or whatever. So we're constantly looking at what can we do next, are we prepared? But There are many things that we could do, like when they rebuilt the Sandy Hook School in another setting. I haven't personally visited it, but the people I know who have or have seen it said it's built so differently from what a typical school would be built like now in terms of the safety precautions and the doors and the windows and all the different things that are being done. And obviously that's extremely expensive, and we can't rebuild the school,
Yeah.
but we can try to put as many things in place as possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show today. We'll be back in a few moments with our closing segment. Thank you.
Okay.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here once again, Colin Tong. This segment, I'm here with Mr. Joyce, history teacher here at Bishop Timon High School. Mr. Joyce, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to start off. A shooting today took place just outside of Washington, D.C. Campus security officer ended the shooting by fatally taking out the shooter. How do you feel about that happening today? Another event that
It's just unfortunately becoming a business as usual in the United States, and it's just tragic. And it's almost to the point where you're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. Where is the next tragedy going to take place? How is it going to play out? And I don't see any way that we're going to avoid this from happening in the future. I guess all we can do is discuss nationally ways to mitigate these tragedies as much as possible. But putting an end to them at this point seems an impossibility, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I mentioned, a campus security officer took down the shooter. One idea that's out there that people want to bring forth to Congress is giving teachers guns. So we're going to pose this as a multiple choice question for you. Do you think that teachers should have guns in school? A, all trained teachers can have one. B, there should be a process to select specific teachers. Or C, no teacher should be armed.
I don't think any teacher should be armed. I think that putting guns in an environment like a school classroom, which is already, susceptible to a lot of emotional and mental, mood swings, and I just think that you're asking for trouble in terms of, introducing such an unpredictable and potentially tragic element into a classroom. I don't see any good coming from that. A teacher, no matter how well trained, is still in an environment that's, especially at the time of a shooting, would be highly unpredictable, very chaotic. Oftentimes, these shooters are armed with high-capacity semi-automatic weapons. I'm not sure that a teacher with little training armed with a handgun is going to be able to make much of a difference in a situation like that. I just think it just exacerbates the problem and just increases the possibility of someone being shot accidentally and just contributing to the tragedy which is already unfolding. So I'm against it.
So a lot of people are for this. They make the argument that guns are the only way to stop this so-called violence by causing more violence if necessary. So without guns, in your opinion, what do you think are other ways that schools can take the precaution of being more safe?
Well, I think obviously the first focus point should be, a designated access point, right? One access point in and out of the school. They can be monitored at all time. That's going to really cut down the ability for someone hoping to do harm to get into the school. If you've got, everyone entering the school through one particular point, which again is monitored, I think that that's really going to cut down the ability of potential shooters to access school. Obviously, it's not going to stop all incidences that we've seen, but I think that it's limiting the entrance ways in and out of the school, which I think is most effective in determining who's able to gain access to school and who's not.
Mm-hmm. One question that a lot of students are posing as they feel the threat is imminent upon them is what can the NRA do or the government do to help limit the supply of guns to minors and potential threats to the schools?
Well, the NRA, it gets a lot of flack. There's a lot of criticism out there, the NRA and their policies and their influence on politicians, particularly obviously Republican politicians, is hampering efforts at necessary gun reform. I think that the NRA for the most part is made up of decent law-abiding individuals who are looking to protect Second Amendment rights, which I completely support. But at the same time, I think that much of the leadership of the NRA is out of touch with the common sense approaches that the vast majority of Americans consistently are shown to support. Polling shows that most Americans want to limit access to semi-automatic weapons, want to improve background checks, which right now are not in place in many instances. For instance, gun show purchases. I think the majority of Americans would like to see more mental health evaluations for gun owners and the confiscation of guns from people who fail mental health exams. And those are all things that the NRA opposes. And again, those are things that I think most people would consider common sense approaches to dealing with gun violence. And for whatever reason, the leadership of the NRA seems to be out of step with the membership of the NRA, frankly, and the majority of the American population. When it comes to the government, we have to remember that states have most of the power in regulating firearms within the confines of their state. Federally, you can look at a assault weapon ban, which was in effect, which is allowed to expire. And I think that's something, again, that we have to look into. I think that, I really question the need for most citizens to have access to assault-style weapons. Because the potential, again, for mass violence like we see over and over again in schools, as well as Las Vegas and the Pulse nightclub, show that these weapons are really just too volatile and too potentially dangerous to be available to the majority of Americans, and that's my opinion at least.
And the fact that even minors can go out and purchase, a lot of the people that are shooting up schools are young people that somehow can gain access to these guns under the age of 21, which I feel, my opinion, is quite ridiculous.
Right. I mean, if you're making the judgment that young people aren't responsible enough to consume alcohol before 21, yet they're responsible to purchase an AK-47. I don't see the logic of that. If you're gonna question the responsibility of a young person to engage in alcohol consumption and yet say that they're responsible enough for the very heavy burden of gun ownership, particularly semi-automatic weapons. To me, again, like you said, I can't see the logic of that.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think is the responsibility of students in the schools to help make sure that everyone stays safe? It's not just the teachers that are in control of the
Right, I
students.
think it's collaboration has to take place. I think you have to have a multifaceted approach which has to encompass all the elements of the school community, which is faculty, administration, and the students. The students know each other better than we know them, or that the administration could ever hope to know them.
Mm-hmm.
The students know each other. They know their issues. They know any potential problems a student might have. They know the relative stability of a student vis-a-vis their peers. And I think student cooperation and communication with faculty and administration is crucial to maybe pointing out who might be a potential threat. And we saw the failure of that in Florida, where students had pegged this individual Cruz, a potential school shooter, 2 years before he actually committed to doing that deed. And I think that if there would have been better communication between the students and the faculty and the administration, that hopefully maybe that could be prevented in the future from happening. But it all comes down to communication, collaboration. Everyone's got to be all in together and view this as a multifaceted approach to dealing with the really serious concern.
So we're going to go to our final question here. If you were in total control, what would be your plan for protecting students in all the schools across the nation?
Again, I think that the first thing would be to make sure that schools are secure, as I said, through monitored access points, and everyone coming in to the school has to come through a monitored access point. And I think that would really allow the school to look at the legitimacy of the person trying to gain access to the school. I also think that what you need, as I mentioned, is collaboration between all aspects of the school community working together. I don't know if you can avoid these tragedies in the future. If people mean to do harm, they're going to do it. But hopefully you can mitigate the risk in some of the circumstances.
All right, so that'll do it for this segment of our show. Mr. Joyce, I'd like to thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We'll be back for our next segment just after this.
Okay.
A couple of weeks ago, we started a broadcast to address the issues of gun violence in our nation. During our recent taping, we were faced with yet another school shooting this time at Great Mills High School in Maryland. What is it going to take for our national and civic leaders to finally stand up and put an end to this once and for all? Problems of mental health, bullying, and personal conflict are not unique to the United States, but yet gun violence is. We need to swallow our pride and admit that even though we are one of the greatest nations in the world, we do not have all the answers. Our country should look towards other countries and try to learn from their success and make them our own. One of the most important things we see today is students taking a stand and letting their voices be heard. They are protesting for more effective gun laws so these incidents can hopefully come to an end. We need to stand up for those being bullied, ignored, ostracized just because of how they look, the way they dress, and being their own individual. Gun violence. One cannot say when is it going to end, but certainly we could try to help and put an end to it with compassion, understanding, and tolerance towards our fellow men. I'm Kobe Thurman, and on behalf of my co-host Cullen Tong, we would like to thank Mr. Joyce, Mr. Kamotek, and Ms. Simmons for letting us interview him. Thank you. Goodbye.